In this video, you're going to learn multiple things: how much it costs to fly private on a chartered jet, how that compares to the variable costs of owning your own private jet, and how that compares to the total cost of owning a private jet. I'll also be revealing how much HouseHack is being billed for my use of a private plane to go look at houses in various areas around the country. And in fact, I'll actually start with that. As of today, January 15th, after multiple flights to look at real estate, HouseHack has been billed a grand total of $0. Now, you might think, wait, that's crazy. Like, I came here to learn about the cost of a private jet, but why would you not bill your housing startup for you flying around on a private jet? And I'll answer that very quickly. I believe that as long as I can subsidize this private plane with my YouTube and media business, I can provide value to people on the internet and make sure that my housing startup has the best training wheels possible. Because ultimately, I think that housing startup could be a multi-billion-dollar company. But we've got to make sure it's got the strongest foundation first. And right now, it is milking treasuries as I hunt for real estate to prep to pull the trigger for our housing startup once the market bottoms out. We're not quite there yet. I think we've got at least another 6 to 12 months to go before we hit a potential bottom in the real estate market. Then we're going shopping. Now, let's talk about the costs of private jet travel. Keep in mind, if you want to fly with me and explore real estate with me, there is a link down below where you can join me and go on a ride with me on my plane as we go explore real estate. The point of the day is a shadowing experience where you shadow me for the day. So you don't have control over where we're going, obviously, but you hop on and you follow me as we go hunt real estate. You get to go in the properties with me, ask questions of the agent or myself. And yeah, anything that we want to get done, we get done in that day, and they tend to be pretty exciting days. To date, we've conducted 3 amazing shadowing experiences, and if you want to join on the shadowing experience, check out that link down below. So let's jump on over to NetJets. NetJets is a commercial service where you can essentially charter a private plane. I actually think it's one of the best services next to Wheels Up, though I think NetJets is a little bit more premier. Both of them, though, pretty good services. Usually you're paying, and keep in mind, this is not me quoting you, okay? I'm not a NetJets salesperson, so I want to be very clear. These prices could obviously change. But for my purposes, it seemed like NetJets would cost me about $14,000 per flight hour. That's a lot of money. That means every minute you're on a private jet, you're paying $233. That is a lot of freaking money, and I think it's way too expensive to do regularly. I think NetJets is awesome if you've got some one-off trips and maybe you want to fly private for, say, 25 hours a year, or maybe 50 hours a year. But if you're flying 400, 500 hours a year, this is insane. You would be better off probably owning your own jet, which is why you're going to see this comparison in just a moment. Now, keep in mind, these companies oftentimes will quote you about a lower number. You'll see like $11,000 or $12,000, but because they can charge you 12 to 14 minutes for taxi time, if you take an hour-long flight, you've almost paid an extra half hour of flight time, even though you were not flying. So if you have an average flight of, let's say, 90 minutes, that's sort of your average flight where you're going, and 28 of those 90 minutes are taxi times, or let's say you're adding 28 minutes on, so then that would be like a 118-minute flight that you're getting billed for, because again, 28 of those are taxi time. That means 23.7% of the money you're spending for the charter is actually going to taxi time. And that's why on my spreadsheet, I don't use the 11 or 12,000. I just assume, hey, if you factor in the taxi time, your realistic cost per hour is much closer to about $14,000. That's where you see about that 20% increase. So that's important to remember if you're chartering. Those taxi times can really add up a lot, especially if you do a bunch of shorter flights. Now, what you're going to see is if you take 4 destinations here, Salt Lake, Seattle, Apple Valley, and Phoenix, and you divide, or rather multiply by $233 per minute, the minutes of the flight times that it would take to get to these various destinations, you'll see the total costs of getting to these various destinations. If you want to fly private to Salt Lake, you're paying about $22,000. To Seattle, almost $30,000. Phoenix, $17,700. Apple Valley, $6,600. These are extremely expensive numbers. Now, obviously, there are some benefits to private jet travel. You get to determine the departure time. There is no TSA. You don't have to stand in line and wait for your plane. The odds of you getting a canceled flight or a delayed flight are substantially fewer. You could fly there and back the same day, which you usually can't do if you're flying commercially, right? A lot of benefits, but these prices are ridiculous. There's no way you could pay these prices if you were doing this regularly. Now, don't get me wrong. One-off, you want to go travel 25, 50 hours, NetJets, Wheels Up, phenomenal companies, really like them. Can you do it regularly? Not if you want to be in a situation where you're flying 400 or 500 hours a year. That kind of pricing just won't work out. So, what does it look like if you want to own a plane? Yes, plane ownership. Let's get into some of the costs of plane ownership. And mark your calendar for January 30th, because that's when the coupon code #JET expires for not just traveling with us for a shadow experience, but also for the programs on building your wealth. You can get in for as little as just over $300 into one of the amazing programs that we have down below. They're a lot more affordable than a lot of people think, but check out the Elite Hustlers University for increasing your income, 0 to Millionaire Real Estate Investing, where you literally learn my blueprint for everything in real estate investing. Do Yourself Property Management Group, where you learn my blueprint for exactly what to spend money on and what not to spend money on in a rental property. That could save you thousands of dollars, in addition to our Lowe's partnership that we have with the Do It Yourself Property Management course. Also, check out the courses on being an agent, YouTuber, or Stocks and Psychology of Money Group. Link down below. Let's say you hire 2 pilots, because even though a lot of planes can be flown by 1 pilot, planes are a lot safer when you have redundancies. There's a reason you have 2 wings, 2 engines, 2 pilots, and almost 2 of every single system on a plane. Now look, I get 2 wings is a little extreme, but generally planes want redundancy at every single level. At any time, well, almost any time you look at aircraft accident or aviation accident incidences, you usually see multiple chain events of mistakes, errors, and failures. It's rarely one thing that brings a plane down. So safety, super important. And in my opinion, having 2 pilots is a must. And you want experienced pilots, not, I'm gonna go get my own pilot's license to try to save, $220,000 a year. In the grand scheme of things, it's not worth what you're paying for owning a plane to put yourself into that risk where you think you can do it better than somebody who's been doing it for thousands of hours. That's a bad idea. Now, if you pay $470,000 in salaries, you're probably going to be paying another $141,000 in salary additions. Those are things like workers' comp and payroll taxes. I calculated it at about 30%, plus things like here's a new headset or whatever, right? You've got about $50,000 in annual flight training to keep a jet pilot's type rating. It's very expensive. Hangar probably will cost you about $50,000 a year. Insurance with 2 pilots, about $40,000 a year. You try to do this yourself as a new pilot, as just a single pilot, you'd probably be paying triple that. Management, about $60,000. An airplane manager is somebody who's going to work on everything related to the planes. Maintenance, the safety of the plane, coordinating the trip, the pilots, coordinating your destinations in terms of working with the airports to make sure you have a car available for you when you're there. Now, obviously, you could in-house this. That is, maybe your pilots could do that for you, or you could do it yourself. But it's one of those things where your first few years of plane ownership, you're probably going to be outsourcing your airplane management as you just get your feet wet in airplane ownership. Additional miscellaneous costs, things break, right? It's mechanical, so assume $50,000 a year. Internet, this would be like 5G go-go internet, limited to some kind of data cap, so you don't really want to be streaming, but probably somewhere around $5,000 per month. If you want unlimited, you'd probably be about quadrupling that. So it gets really expensive really fast. These are now called your fixed costs. These are things that you're paying whether or not you're flying the plane. That's $921,000 whether or not you actually take off. So if you buy a plane, you better be flying the sucker, because if you leave it sitting in a hangar, you're financially ruining yourself. And this doesn't even consider aircraft depreciation, which means over time, generally, aircrafts, just like cars, lose value. All right, moving on. Variable costs to plane ownership. Maintenance, consider these as hourly costs. This is really important. Hourly costs. Maintenance, about $125 an hour. These are usually maintenance programs. Engine programs, probably about $250 per flight hour. Tires and brakes, $30 per flight hour. If you do a bunch of short flights and short trips though, this could bump up pretty quickly. Gas, $915 per hour. The particular aircraft that we have is a Phenom 300E, which burns about 165 gallons per flight hour. That's actually, and I know it sounds crazy, but pretty dang efficient for corporate jet travel. It's probably one of the most efficient corporate jets that exists. Again, that's the Phenom 300E, but it's still very expensive. And gas costs are here being calculated at about I think I used $5.50 per gallon of jet fuel. They were as high as $7-8 not too long ago. Hopefully those costs continue to come down. Either way, that brings your total variable cost for flying versus not flying to $1,320. Now, that's actually really incredibly different from if you chartered a plane, obviously, because now you own it, right? But now, the difference of you flying or not flying is really extreme, because if you already own the plane, the difference of you actually flying is only $1,320 versus $14,000 with a charter. So anybody who tells you, oh, why would you buy your own private plane? It's, so much cheaper to charter, either isn't considering how many hours somebody actually wants to fly in a year, or they have no idea what they're talking about. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and assume they don't know how many hours a year you want to fly. We want to be nice to people. So that brings your total variable cost to about $1,320 per hour. That brings your variable cost per minute to $22, which if you compare that to the charter, that's about 1/10 of the cost. It's actually less than 1/10 of the cost, which is pretty remarkable. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you 4 of my recent flights. You could actually verify these by looking up the tail number of the plane, N88W, and you could see the exact flight times that I actually took. So this is not like, trying to fluff the numbers here or whatever. These are actual flight times for these actual destinations that I was looking for real estate in. And you'll notice Salt Lake City took us 94 minutes, Seattle 127, Apple Valley 26. We actually came in slow on that. That should have been like 15 minutes, but we got diverted, so that could have been a lot less, but sometimes that happens. Phoenix, about 76. Okay, so those are the minutes. Multiplied by the variable cost would bring your one-way flight to these numbers here, but we're not just going one way, we're going round trip. So a round trip flight to Salt Lake costs about $4,136. Compare that round trip flight to a charter going to Salt Lake at about $22,000. You can see it's less than 1/5 of the price to be flying the plane ourselves. Round trip. That's pretty incredible because actually, wait a second, because remember the cost was 1/10? This was only one way. So if you actually took these flights here both ways, which presumably you would, so you wouldn't be stuck, you would be sitting in a situation where you'd be paying almost $44,000 to go round trip to Salt Lake versus $4,100 in your own plane in variable costs. Now, this is where jet travel gets really fun. If you load up your plane with people who need to be there, and this is important, okay? If you just start putting like kids on and you're trying to trick yourself into thinking it's a less cost per ticket, now you're just tricking yourself, right? So you have to be reasonable. If you're actually filling up 9 seats on the plane with people who are learning and need to be there for the purpose of the company, well, now your cost per ticket actually becomes very reasonable. Now, I know that sounds crazy because it's like, wait, how could private jet travel ever be reasonable? Well, look at it. If you go to Salt Lake, it's $459 per ticket in variable costs. Seattle, $620, Apple Valley, $127, but you couldn't even fly private to Apple Valley. You would just drive, and that would make for, a pretty long day, or you'd stay overnight in a hotel, but then you'd have the hotel cost. Phoenix, $371. Now, if you compare to commercial tickets, what's remarkable is a commercial ticket to Salt Lake City would cost you about $466 per ticket. That's about the same as the variable costs on the private jet. However, you'd have to add about $1,000 for a hotel. That would be assuming double occupancy, 5 hotel rooms, assuming everybody is willing to room with each other, right? So now, and that's $200 a night, which honestly is like it's not going to be a great hotel, which it's okay. It's just a bed, right? Like you're there for work. Like let's not get ridiculous here. But a lot of hotels these days are like $250, $300 a night plus taxes and fees, right? Anyway, let's just assume $200 a night. That brings your round trip cost with a commercial flight to $5,194, which is actually $1,000 more than the private travel because you don't have the hotel cost, right? Seattle, $5,588 versus $5,950. Phoenix, $4,078 versus $3,344 for the private jet. Again, this is showing you the variable costs of a private jet versus the round trip with a commercial airline for 9 people. And again, if you don't actually need those 9 people, the numbers obviously shift here. If you're just solely going yourself, then the numbers are quite different. But then it's very difficult to suggest how are you ever going to grow a company by yourself, like HouseHack, my real estate startup. I've got to do my best to teach as many people as possible my model, the wedge deals, what we do with our real estate startup, so that way everybody in my business is cross-trained. Ultimately, I want to get it to where I can train everybody in my real estate startup, including the pilots who are basically ordinarily a sunk cost. They're with us all the time anyway. But if I could change this to 11 people going on flights, well, now all of a sudden your cost per ticket gets ridiculous because you've got 11 people walking through houses with you, actively learning about real estate. That is what you want ultimately when you're building a big business, something that you expect to be a multi-billion-dollar business in the future, right? Okay, now that's great, but again, this is only the variable cost. On a variable basis, it makes a lot of sense to use a private jet, but there are a lot more things to be considered other than just variable costs. As you saw earlier, we also have fixed costs to consider. Now, I want to be very, very clear again. We've done about 4 flights now specifically for HouseHack. Again, for the time being, I'm paying for all of the costs for the plane, fixed and variable, myself. So all of the flying that people have seen so far, and for a good portion of time into the future, are me subsidizing all of the flight costs. And I'm doing that very clearly because I want to make sure that we're as efficient as possible for this business. And I want to make sure that upfront, everything is very, very clear that my media business pays for this plane. That's what it is right now. In the future, that might change when we actually have 11 people and maybe we bill variable costs, right? Something very reasonable. But again, right now, HouseHack has been charged $0 for the cost of this plane. However, if I build in now annual fixed costs at $921,000, the variable costs at 400 hours of $528,000, the loan on the plane, since I financed the plane, the payments on that of about $888,000 a year, this plane costs about $2.3 million per year to operate. Now that's pretty high. However, unfortunately, the first year of flying the plane is free. Now you might say to yourself, how the heck is the first year of owning a private jet free? Well, here's some rough math for you. I tweeted this. It got like 8,300 likes. If you make $12.8 million of income, you'd likely only owe $5.2 million in federal taxes. If you buy a $12.8 million private jet with a $3.25 million down payment, money coming out of pocket, right? But ordinarily money you'd have to pay towards taxes, you could write off 100% of the jet and owe $0 in federal taxes. That means the government just gave you about $2 million to help pay for your jet costs. If you now include some of the tax benefits on the state level, which are not as good as the federal level, we expect that the vast majority of our first year will be free for this plane. Now that's really, really cool because that means thanks to the way the tax regimes work in the world, we have this private jet that on variable cost highly competes with commercial air travel as long as we have a lot of people that we're training in real estate. And the flights for the entire year and the cost of the plane and the down payment are covered for the first year. And down payment really forever because that money would have gone to taxes unless, of course, you sell the plane in the future, which then you'd face depreciation, recapture, and it'd be a disaster. You'd really, once you get into owning a plane, you do not want to sell it because you'll get screwed. Unfortunately, that does bring your cost per hour to $5,842. So That means the vast majority of expenses of owning a plane are owning the plane, not using the plane. Consider this. If your variable costs per hour on the plane are $1,320, and what you do is you divide that by your total costs of owning the plane, your variable costs are only about 22.5%, which means if you own a plane, you are really incentivized to actually fly the plane and use it. Because again, 77.4% of the cost is the plane just sitting there. Now, if you do actually fly it 400 hours per year, what's cool is you could look at this cost per hour and divide it by, again, like a NetJets, which, look, this is not to bag on NetJets. I love NetJets. And they know themselves, like, look, if you're going to fly 400 hours a year, don't pay these rates. Like, get into our fractional ownership programs or our leasing programs or whatever, right? Fine. But still, just to compare the one-off charters to actually owning your plane, it's about 41% as expensive to own versus the one-off charters. That's good. Over time, if you pay off the loan on the plane, costs go down a lot. Or, more realistically, if we bump this to, let's say, flying 600 hours per year, which would be in the air for a little over 11 to 12 hours a week, it's quite a bit of flying, but let's say you bump this to 600 hours of variable costs, and then we divide the cost per hour by 600 instead of by 400, your cost now goes down to about $4,300 in total per flight hour. So now the cost of the plane in total cost goes up to 2.6 compared to what it was previously, which was 2.337. But it just shows you could get an extra 200 hours of flight time in for nominally more. You could literally fly 50% more flying. And what did we say it would cost? It would cost somewhere around, I think this math is very fascinating. You fly 600 hours. Oh yeah, compared to 2337, you've got now 2601. 2601 minus 2337. You're flying, it's costing you $264,000 more to fly 56% or 50% more. 2,670. Divide that now by 200 hours more. So 267 divided by 200 hours. Yeah, now the total cost of operating more is only down to about $1,335 per hour, which is really actually similar to what we were using here as just our variable costs. So again, the reiteration here is if you own a jet, fly that sucker all the frickin' time. The only reason this could change, though, is over here, if instead of salaries you were using contract pilots, then your numbers could change a little bit. But you really want to get pilots on salary if you're going to be flying this much, in my opinion, and treat them really, really well. But again, the cost, like once you own a plane, and if somebody like Kevin and Lauren Paffrath say, hey, we're going to take the personal liability of this plane, and maybe we're in the future going to bill like variable costs plus some reasonable depreciation or whatever, it is so reasonable to actually fly private if you're trying to build a large real estate business and you got to get back and forth every single day to different areas to check in. Or my favorite, and I really love this, you go fly, let's say, from LA to Austin, then you go check out real estate in Austin, you fly to San Antonio, you fly to Houston, or maybe the other way around, right? You fly to Houston first, and then you go to Austin, then San Antonio, and then you fly back. Now you just hit 3 cities in a day. That is pretty sick. So, a lot of things to consider when it comes to private flight, but I personally think if you're considering flying private, well, first of all, you better have a really good reason to be flying around. And this is why you see corporate jet travel, like the Walmart vice presidents travel around together on a private jet. They do that not because Walmart isn't a frugal company. It's because Walmart realizes, oh my gosh, if we're paying all these VPs to fly around and go look at our stores and make sure we're operating our businesses efficiently, we may as well shove 10 of them in a plane together and have them go fly around together private and come back same day. Works out less expensively than paying hotels for them, the lost productivity of them being elsewhere. So get good people in good seats, fly around. It makes sense, as long as you're flying for business. And a lot of people look at private jet ownership as just really a luxury, as something that's never justifiable, and as something that people just do when they want to leverage themselves up to their eyeballs or like have more money than they know what to do with. But when you actually look at the business case, not just the sort of entertainment case of a plane, because it's still flying, it's still work, right? Sure, can you do one-off family trips or whatever? Of course, but you wouldn't want to buy a private jet for that. It would be way too expensive, right? That's where you charter. For business, does it make sense? 110%. Thank you so much for watching this, and folks, we'll see you in the next one.